Hi everyone. So in this video I want to talk a little bit about a free bandsaw that I restored and got back into working condition. So my wife found a neighbor that was just giving away a bandsaw, and the story behind it is that they I believe they had a father-in-law or something like that that had this bandsaw, and basically he didn't really use it anymore, so he gave it to them and they didn't use it, and so it had been sitting, I think, in a shed somewhere, really just unmaintained for many years, and so they just wanted to get rid of it because they figured they were never going to use it. So they offered it up, and my wife knew I was looking for a bandsaw, and so I snapped it up immediately. So I got it home, and this was one of the first pictures I took of it. This was after I had already kind of swept some of the cobwebs off of it. So you can see it looks a little dirty, a little rusty. It's I looked into it a little bit. It's a 12-inch Craftsman bandsaw. Apparently a pretty popular model, and it was from the, I think, early to mid 80s, so pretty old. So inside of it doesn't look too bad. Again, just kind of dusty, a little bit of rust here and there, as you can see on the base. But then you get inside, so this is the top wheel. Again, doesn't look too bad. Here, the bottom wheel, this is the first sign that a few things are off. So that's actually in the lower right corner. There is a wasp's nest. So some wasps made their home in this bandsaw for I don't know how long. And if you look at the top wheel, a chunk of the tire from the top wheel was missing, and the adhesive underneath the tire, this is just an old rubber tire that I'm sure came with the bandsaw. The adhesive was definitely practically non-existent, like it was coming apart. The motor pulley wasn't even attached anymore. That's not that big a deal. But the belt was a little torn up, so needed to remount the motor and put the pulley back on. Again, this is the front cover, so this is what you take off when you want to put a new blade on or something like that. And it's just dirty mainly, but it's hard to see in the picture, but there's kind of a like the instructional panel on there that has all the info for it. Basically it had some kind of coating on it that it kind of was flaking off and was kind of obscuring the panel, so you couldn't even really read it anymore. And so this is, I've actually, in this picture, I've taken out the top blade guide. So this is where you get to some stuff that's actually functionally wrong with it. This is the bearing and adjustment screws and the blade guides. And basically they have a mixture of dust and dried oil, I think, and just generally just gunk, such that you can't turn any of the adjustment screws, like the bearings wouldn't turn. It was totally non-functional. And likewise with the bottom blade guides. So again, none of the adjustment, I think there's about 3 different adjustment screws down here, plus the blade guides. None of it would move. It was just all sort of gunked up and locked in place. This is the backside with the table removed, so the right behind the lower blade guides. So again, just gunked up, dirty. So here I've started the disassembly process. I took the top wheel off, and which took a little bit of work to get some retaining clips free and pull it off, even though the lubrication was pretty much just solidified there. So that took a little bit of effort, but I eventually got the wheel off. The bottom wheel I just left on. It was in decent shape, so I figured, unless the bearings were pretty noisy and crappy, I'd just try and leave that wheel on. And I never did have to remove it, so I kind of lucked out there. So here, this is the upper blade guide. So I basically took the whole thing apart and took every screw, every washer, every bearing, the guide blocks out, everything, and just basically scrubbed it, like cleaned it off, oiled it up, got it down to bare metal again, and got all the screws cleaned out so that you could actually adjust the mechanisms again. And this is the shaft, like the tension adjustment mechanism with the wheel shaft mounted on it. So I just took that out of the bandsaw and again just cleaned it all so that the bearing the guide rods there were all clean so that they move freely. Cleaned up the spring, that kind of thing, the tension spring. And finally, so here's the wheel detached. So I did a couple things here. This was the first kind of money I put into the saw. I got a new set of bandsaw tires, urethane bandsaw tires. So that was, I don't know, probably $25, something like that. And pulled off the old tire. It took a little while to clean off all the old adhesive that was still stuck on there, but so took a little time to clean that all out. Got the new tire on there, which was interesting. I've never done that before, so stretching that over the rim was a pretty tough process, but I eventually got it. And then one of the bearings, so there's two bearings in this wheel, and one of the bearings was a little rough, and I think it was mainly because it had some solidified grease inside the bearing. So I pulled there was a little plastic cover over the bearing, or over the internals of the bearing. So I was able to kind of pry that off, and then cleaned out all the old solidified grease and repacked grease in there, and then put the cover back on the bearing, and it ran quite a bit smoother then. Most of the other bearings were actually in pretty good shape, so I didn't feel the need to replace any of them. We'll see as time goes on. I may want to replace those, but for now they seem okay. So next up, I had to get creative and press the wheel back onto the upper shaft. So I figured, since I have the whole shaft assembly out of the bandsaw, I can actually use some clamps to help me out there. So that's what I did. And here's the wheel remounted, the bearing, the upper blade guide remounted there. So basically the top half of the bandsaw is done here at this point. So now on to the lower blade guide. So just to remind you, that's how they looked before I started cleaning. And here's how they looked after I got done. So much better. And they actually move and function now, so that's kind of a bonus. So next up, I didn't mention it before, but the table insert was missing. So basically there was just a big gaping hole where the blade went through the table. So I found that, I think I had some 1/8 inch hardboard sitting around in my spare parts bin. So I used a fly cutter on my drill press to basically cut just the right diameter circle. And then I fit that into the table. And then when I eventually got the saw blade running, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, but I actually cut a slot for the blade to go in. So here's kind of the finished product there. It's not perfect, but it works pretty well. Pretty happy with it. So I also got the motor pulley remounted, and so you can see the belt there. I did end up buying a new belt. I found a new belt for $5 or $6. It's just a pretty ordinary V belt. So I got a new one of those, which helped a little bit with vibration, but not a ton. So the old belt, even though it looked trashy, was actually probably okay. So I had to basically remount the motor here, like readjust where it was bolted to the frame of the bandsaw. And so here is my first test of the pulley and lower wheels. I don't have a blade on there yet. I was just testing to make sure that the motor pulley and the wheel and the bearings and all that stuff for the lower wheel worked. So I was kind of holding my breath a little bit here. I flipped the switch and sort of jumped back a little bit to make sure, nothing flew apart. So you can see there, it all went okay. And so the very next thing I did was go ahead and put a blade on there and tensioned it, and I got it adjusted right, and then really quickly after I turned it on, it made a weird noise, and I flipped it off, and it turned out that I thought the tire that was on the bottom wheel was okay, the old tire, but it turned out it wasn't. The adhesive that was attaching it had also failed, just like it did on the top of the wheel, or on the top wheel. And so as soon as I turned it on, the tire started just sliding off the wheel, and so the blade was soon just on bare metal. So I turned it off, and when I bought the new urethane tires, it came with 2. So I went ahead and put the second tire on the bottom wheel. So brand new tires on both wheels. Probably a better way to go. And finally, here it is in action. Actually cutting some wood. So all in all, I've been really, really happy with how this turned out. Really, the saw has exceeded all my expectations, and I'm just super pleased to have a bandsaw in my shop. And it's a pretty good one, and I think all told I probably spent something like $30 to get it back up and running, and quite a few hours of work disassembling the whole thing and putting it back together again. But well worth the effort, and now I know how to take it all apart and repair it and basically rebuild the whole thing if I ever want to or need to. So I really love this bandsaw. It's a great tool. Well, thanks for watching.